Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. What a great crowd. I am astounded. My name is Patricia Violet Adams, and I'm the new executive director here at the Historical Society. And I know you've all come out you're curious about me. That's why you're here. No, we have a great program for you today. But before we get into the specifics, there's a little business we need to get down to. So in 2 weeks, on November 10th, we are bringing back a couple of wonderful musicians, Ilya and Sergey. They'll be here on Sunday, November 10th. Doors open at 2:15, and the concert will begin at 3 p.m. It is $20 per person, and we do hope that you'll come out and continue to support them as they are regulars here. Also, our Christmas party, our annual party, is going to be this year Thursday on December 5th, and it starts at 5 o'clock. At 5:30, we have the Sanford High School choral group who will be performing, and lots of refreshments to follow. So we do hope that you'll come on out and support us for that as well. All right, let's get down to it, shall we? Thank you again for being here. I have got to do a head count. Wow, this is amazing. So we have two speakers, and our first speaker is Jonathan Wells. He's a retired Pan Am Systems locomotive engineer and an authority on the Worcester, Nashua, and Portland division of Boston and Maine Railroad. The old NWNP was the busiest track freight railroad in the country in the early 1900s and carried rich vacationers to resorts in Down East. Due to primitive traffic control measures of the day, the railroad also had a terrible crash history, which I hope we hear a little bit about today. Mr. Wells, who resides in Ocean Park, Maine, has been in service in Portsmouth, in Billerica, the Newburyport branch, and locals out of Portland and Lawrence, respectively. He is involved with a group that has purchased and restored the former Sandown, New Hampshire depot. This country station is now a museum, which commemorates the entire WNNP division. Following Mr. Wells's presentation, our second speaker, Lee Burnett, who is a semi-retired journalist and has long been involved with trails, downtown revitalization, and land conservation. He believes news is not just a story about new and important things, but stories about important old things that have been forgotten. One of his current projects is working with the Sanford Housing Authority and the Savini family, if I pronounce that right, to restore Springfield's namesake spring. These talks are accompanied by a display of memorabilia collected by the family of Frederick Horn, who worked at the Springvale station of B&M Railroad for 50 years and was the last employee when it was sold to Sanford and Eastern in 1949. So without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Jonathan Wells.
How's everybody doing? When I was driving here, I wonder if there'll be 10, 15 people. My goodness, this is incredible. Yeah, so I live up in the Old Orchard Beach area, and used to summer there all the time with my parents. My dad was a teacher, so all summer up in Maine. And about 2 or 3 times a year, he'd go, "Hey, let's go see some of the old WNNP." First time I was like, WN and what? And that's probably where my lust for this came to fruition. I retired in 2021, and this is one of my hobbies. I'm the lead singer in a band we call J-Train. Shocker. And but the WNNP is an interesting story because most lines were built from A to B. And what happened here was you had the Portland and Rochester, but it originally was York and Cumberland. to depict the counties. And from the get-go, it was a mess. They had sections where they said, okay, we're going to build Portland to the Saco River, and then the Saco River to, I think it was Lebanon, somewhere there, and then on down. They were going to go to Somersworth, which was really kind of strange why they would go there, because all it does is link back to the B&M at Dover, just above it at Rollinsford. So anyway, these guys started building it in 1850. It took till 1871 to get across the Saco River in Bar Mills. And I have the 1851 annual report, and all there is in it is finger pointing. Where's this money? The tracks aren't built right. It was just a bumbling mess. So what happened was, eventually, there was the railroad to Worcester and Nashua, and they came up and they got talking with by then the Portland and Rochester, and they said, all right, we'll build a Rochester if you build down to Rochester, and that's what happened. So this is an old one of their engines. They all had names. So that one's Narragansett, which had nothing to do with the beer, I don't think, at the time. And they were quite busy, and once the railroads linked up, then it just took off. But you have to remember, there were 3 lines that went to Portland from the south. This was one. You had the Eastern Railroad out of Boston, which went up through Portsmouth, and then the B&M, which ended up being the winner of all. They came up through Lawrence and on up to Dover. And so you had 3 competing lines going on here. So eventually, the B&M won out with everything. This is one of the schedules. Now, at the height of it, they say there were 6 passenger trains a day, 20 freights, and then there were also what they call way freights, which would switch the small sidings, at a granary or a lumber mill or whatever. So it was a very, very busy railroad with lots of stuff going on all the time. And Sanford-Springvale was basically a hub. And you also had the Mousom River trolley line, which became the Atlantic Shore line. And they used those tracks to switch the Goodall mills. So every rail line has a track chart. So at the top, you have your mileposts. So W107, you're 107 miles from Worcester, you're 40 miles from Portland. Tells you what kind of grading there is. The curvy lines, those are curves in the track. So this first one's to the right, and then a left curve. Straight is your tangents. And in the middle are your crossings, your culverts, whatnot, your signals. And then the most important one for an engineer are the grades. So right there where the 0 is, that's level. Then you start up a hill and you've got the steep grades going up and then back down. So at the Sandown Historical Society, thanks to Eric over here, we put the whole chart from Worcester to Portland up on the wall around the station building. It was really cool. So I have this reproduction booklet, and it lists all the different lines and the stations and then those who worked in it. And if you look at Sanford-Springvale, there's Mr. Horn's name. And I do detect one of his great-grandsons might be in here. And this is some of his wonderful collection you can certainly look at afterwards. This stuff came right out of the depot itself. And the lanterns, some people probably wondering, what do you do with a blue light? All right, that's called flag protection. So let's say you're a maintenance guy and you gotta fix a box car. You gotta crawl under it. You put the blue lights or blue flag by day on each end of it. And that tells a train crew you can't go near that car. So it's a safety feature. Red could be used for numerous things. It could hang in the rear of the caboose to mark the end of the train. And then you have the clear one, which a conductor or whoever would walk around with it so he can see what he's doing once it's dark. Now this is the Mousom River Bridge right up the road. And this is when they were changing it out and modernizing it. And if you have, most of you probably been over this bridge, but it's really neat to look at it. You can still see the date. And now it's a nice rail trail. I've biked up to Deering Pond. And I don't know if you read, about 3-4 years ago, a friend of ours got together with a power company, I believe it was, and they did some underground testing, and they actually found that there is a freight car buried up there by the pond. Kind of a neat find. So you had quite a hub of activity right down the street here, between the trolleys coming along, the trains, freight trains, work trains. So it was a very busy place and had a lot of connections. And this was a picture of it going through Alfred. You can almost hear it screaming through there. But you never know, there's some really cool postcards. And the railroad, back in the day when the railroad was how you do, you don't want to do horseback, you get on the train. So they had pictures of every station, and you'll see numerous stuff on eBay. I was just given some stuff from the Old Orchard Historical Society. One of them is a picture of the North Berwick train station, but interestingly, the lady bought the postcard, wrote a letter to friends, and said, I don't know why we didn't come through Nashua to Deering Junction today, which is this line. Instead, they sent us up here through North Berwick. All I could think was maybe it was a train wreck. See, to further what she said at the beginning, we used to say it was the busiest single-track, unsignaled line in the country, and they had the wrecks to prove it. Oh, shocking. Yeah, Lee's going to talk about this nearby derailment.
This photo is actually in the archives here somewhere. I came across it by accident and I almost fell out of my chair. This was a wreck that happened on the rail bed about 100 yards from here, just on the other side of where there used to be a trestle over Main Street. It happened just west of that. It was a rear ender. Two people were pretty badly hurt. And one of the remarkable things is I was able to find the original newspaper story that described the wreck. And one of the very telling details in the story was that one of the locomotives involved in this, it was the fourth collision that locomotive had been in within the last couple of months. That's how common these collisions were. John knows more about it.
I wasn't the engineer. I was in some derailments, but nothing on this realm of craziness. I think I had a boxcar tip over one time down in Boston. And I turned around and I said, where'd the boxcar go? And the conductor looked out at his side and he goes, it's over here. This was one of the worst wrecks they ever had on the line. It was in Hampstead, which is just below Sandown. And before it was signaled, they ran on train orders. And the southbound, which on the railroad is called west, east is north, but decided they could screw out of Sandown and get down to the next double track ahead of this eastbound train. And it did not happen. And the engineer was killed. Awful mess. And if I do this another time, I don't think we had the pictures put in that Jonathan Kidd put in. So we had someone go digging around there, and they found all kinds of parts of the steam engine. And some of them are in perfect shape. You clean them all up. They're all brass, the condenser valves and whatnot. But my buddy and I walked down there, and we couldn't figure out, like, how could they not see each other? It was at night. But when we were walking back, all of a sudden we realized there's just a very slight curve. And we went, this has got to be where it happened. We started looking around, and you start seeing little bits of metal and whatnot. You never know what you're going to find when you're walking an old railroad bed. So it was kind of neat to figure out right where it happened. And then we told this other young fella, and he went down with a shovel and started digging. And maybe another time he could bring the pieces up here. So after the steam era, you know, it was like between the advent of the automobile, the Depression, it really spelled doom for a number of rail lines. And so the WNP ceased to be a division of the B&M in 1924. They had taken it over in 1900. And they still, you know, they ran the trains, but the B&M didn't want the rural passenger service, so they ran a train out of Portland down to Rochester, but it had no connection time with the train that came up from Nashua. So what good is that? You can't connect, because they wanted to get rid of it. And in 1935 is when the real severances took place, and they tore the line up from up above Air. They kept it into Hollis, and took it out from Hollis to Nashua on up, and left a stub in at Fremont, a stub in at Rochester, and that severed the line. They did keep it in from Portland down through to Rochester, and then these guys took over in 1949. And originally they kept the whole line in, but they had too much interstate commerce, taxes and whatnot by going over into New Hampshire, so they abandoned that line. I believe it was in 52. So this picture, I posted it on one of our B&M Facebook sites, and somebody nailed that house. It's still there, it's in Rochester. Now this gets interesting. The train crew is on the top. The guy on the left, that's my father. The girl on the right, that's not my mother. Don't you worry, they didn't get married. My dad didn't get married until 57, and this got taken out in 52, so you do the math. But yeah, I remember telling me about doing it, switching to Goodall Mills, and going up to Westbrook where they had the connection with the Main Central, and pretty neat stuff. And just so we know what's still in action on the B&M part of the WNP is Worcester to Air, which is about 30 miles, and CSX just rehabbed the whole line, and it's spectacular. It's you know, all 40-mile-an-hour track now. When Pan Am owned it, some of it was down to 10 miles an hour. So it's really doing well. There's a little stuff up in Portland, which ironically, my last day on the railroad, I worked that little piece of the WNP, goes down to a lumber distributor. And you probably all heard about the snow plow that got dumped east of the station there way back and when they abandoned the line. One myth was that they had a wreck, but it's pretty well been proven that what are we going to do with this thing? I'll just run it up there. So they dumped it. There's not much left of it now. That picture was shortly after it happened. I always like this picture. My father took this one when the tracks were still in, and this is right on the Gorham-Buxton line, 202. If I had a long poker, I'd show you, but see that little horizontal thing on the left side of the track up above? That's what's called a wigwag. And some of you might be old enough to remember seeing them, but they basically had 5 red lights that would blink across, and then this arm would swing out and say stop on it. But they weren't too effective, so they didn't last that long. There's one, I think it's active in North Conway, isn't it? Yeah, at the Conway Scenic Railroad. Don't tell anyone, but this was me taking a picture of the engine. This is coming out of Portland, and right around that curve is Deering Junction, where the WNP came in, crossed the main central, and then headed down into Portland. So we're heading toward Deering, and my theory, well, the 2 left tracks are the main central, and I'm pretty sure these 2 tracks here were the old WNP main line. And it's a steep hill going up, and then you swing off to the left and head toward Gorham. This is in Deering Junction. That's a freight train heading to Rumford, and we were sitting on the old WNP waiting for him to go by so we could get out and go back to our train yard, which is called Rigby. Now, if you ever been up near Bar Mills, this is where they crossed, and there's 5 spans of this stonework still standing. And there's kind of a funny picture taken years ago by somebody who was with 2 guys that you can tell used to work on the line after they took it up. And they're both standing there like looking at the abutments like, what a stupid move that was to take the rail line up. When we were doing Sandown, we came up with this t-shirt to commemorate the division, and it'd sell like hotcakes when we go to the annual Springfield train show down in Mass, and I think I got one with me. That was my last day, and we were at Deering Junction right then, and it was emotional, but I always said, hey, I lived my childhood fantasy, I got paid for it, now it's time to move on, do something else. And I just want to prove to you that I'm not a huge train fanatic. You know, it's just got a couple of things like a B&M hat, and another B&M hat, a B&M t-shirt, another B&M t-shirt, a B&M coffee mug, oh, what's this? Oh, shocker. A B&M work shirt. But anyway, we're going to show you a video. Amazingly, we have a video of the Sanford and Eastern in action. And then Lee's going to do a little chat. And but I'm going to stop right here and say, does anyone have any questions? And I'll try my best to answer them. Yes, sir.
What was that wreck you showed us?
1907.
Oh, 1907. Okay.
One thing to remember, I meant to say that with that really bad wreck down in Hampstead was that kind of did the railroad in. The very next year, they put in the block signal system. Because there was just such an outcry, because they kept having wrecks. And, you know, back then there was no hours of service, so I read about one guy worked out of Portland, they'd go all the way to Air and back. And he said sometimes it would take them almost 24 hours. And they had to be awake, they had to pay attention to the train orders. They could fall asleep and, oh, there goes the train, and they thought it was 2:41 train, but it was actually 2:42, and they weren't supposed to go out, and then next thing you know, you get a big wreck. So there's all that, and somebody, you had a question.
The map that showed the curves, what and the grades, what did the like 1.09 mean? Was that percentage or?
That's the grade percent. Grade percent.
Percentage?
So that's fairly steep. You start seeing 2%, that's steep. We had a company that we switched in Portsmouth right under the highway, goes up to a lumber place, and that was 2.5%. Sometimes I'd tell the conductor, because we had to shove the cars in, I'd be like, hey man, hop off, I gotta go back down the bottom and try this again. You know, get some leaves on the track, that spells doom. And of course, engines have sanders, that helps, but you get 3-4 heavy loads of lumber, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I was exploring in the Bar Mills, Buxton area in their historical society and found a picture of a box factory up there. What side of the railroad was it on?
I'd have to research that, but interesting you said Bar Mills. A couple of quick things. One is I met this lady because I would drive by there quite a bit on Route 117, and I'd look. She had her house set back in a hayfield all around. But I'd see this structure, and I go, that's a boxcar. I kept seeing it, and one day I'm like, that's it, I'm going in. Pulled up in there and started talking to her, and you can't make this up. She goes, yeah, well, my grandfather, she's probably in her 80s now, but my grandfather worked for the railroad, and when they abandoned the line, he brought this boxcar so we could put the horses in it. And it's still got all the hardware on it, doesn't have the wheels. And then she took me to Bar Mills, I think it's a recreation hall, and she goes, she got a flashlight. She's like, all right, we're going up in the attic. Okay. So we go up in there, and between the slats and the stairs, she shines a flashlight. She goes, you see those shingles? She goes, that's the old depot. This is the old depot, it's just that they built and expanded it. So you never know what you're going to find. The old Lebanon depot, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is up on Mousen Lake. But you'd never know it because they've built all around the depot. But these things do survive, so you never know what you're going to find. Anybody?
Yeah. What is, I might have missed it. What does B&M stand for?
Boston and Maine.
Okay.
But there's other names like bickering and mischievous, bankrupt and mismanaged. Good question. Way back in the back.
So you didn't touch on it, and it may be beyond the presentation, but my understanding and research on the railroads is you had, Portland, Rochester, and Sanford that became Eastern, and Sanford at the end. But during the Civil War, there was a federal takeover of the railroads, and they were used to move munition supplies and everything else. So it was actually
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. You reminded me of one thing, like the B&M did. They built the line up along Winnipesaukee, and they offered people, if you agree, I think it was within 2 years, you build a structure, a camp, whatever, they would sell you a piece of a parcel of land. And that's one thing that made things boom up that way. Because once the Civil War ended, people wanted to get out of the cities, especially in the summertime, and all these railroads started promoting heavy to tourism, way up into northern Maine, everything. Yeah, good one.
B&M baked beans, is there a connection with the railroad?
Tell you a funny story. That's Burnham and Morrill.
Yeah.
So one day, a friend of mine, God rest her soul, she was hanging out, having a beer in a bar, started talking to this guy. The guy goes, "Yeah, I work for B&M." And she goes, "Oh, my friend Johnny, he works for B&M too." And they talk some more. And the guy's like, "Rigby? Wait a minute. I do baked beans." Can't make it up. Somebody else back there had a question. Lady? Yes.
Thank you. Early on, you had an Alfred postcard.
Wait. I'm deaf one ear and I can't hear out the other.
Oh, sorry. Early on, you had an Alfred postcard. I know it
In laying the railroad tracks, the beds, and what you had to put underneath to keep it from doing all this, that must have been a gigantic part of this project. Hard, hitting ledge and swamp, to keep that straight and going.
Oh, big. He's asking about, when you're building track. Now, interestingly, right now they're adding 6 miles of double track between Wells and North Berwick. And I was down there last week, and everywhere I stopped, there were like 10 to 20 people doing stuff because they're trying to get it back into service November 1st. And new signals, everything. And in this day and age, when you see tracks go back in, that's a plus in my book. Yes, ma'am.
How many track lines are there in Maine? Because I know there's a railroad that goes up through Auburn. There's one that goes to, and stops in Freeport, as far as I know. And then you've got the regular Amtrak.
Yeah, so you basically have the main line through North Berwick coming in, and then in Portland, which is the old Maine Central, it goes 15 miles, there's a split called a junction, called Royal Junction. So to the right goes to Freeport, Brunswick, and then eventually, the tracks are still in, but they're not in use right now, it goes all the way to Waterville. And then the straight line at Royal Junction is the freight traffic, and that goes on to Waterville, on to Bangor, on to Mount and CSX is putting a lot of money into all of it, really upgrading things.
What about the one that goes through Old Orchard? I know they just had some.
That's North Berwick, Wells, Kennebunk, Biddeford, Saco, Old Orchard, and then on to Portland.
So during the same trip, when I found out about the box factory, we were also reading some old articles, and it mentioned 422 locomotive with quote polygonal wheels. You know anything about that? What that meant?
Way back, they had 442 was pretty common, and 440, the WNP, you know, basically got abandoned before the monster engines came into play, the 4.62s. If you're not sure what I mean by those numbers, when you look at a steam engine, you look in the front, the smaller wheels, then the drivers, and then if there's any wheels, small wheels in the end of the engine under the cab, and you multiply it by 2. So if you see 1, 3, 1, that engine's a 2.62. Not too difficult. But yeah, one of the most common engines, steam engines to run on the WNP were moguls. And if you want to see a mogul, go down to Danbury, Connecticut, to the Danbury Railway Museum. There's still one there. Yes, sir?
You mentioned elevation. It's pretty interesting how they laid the railroad out to, prevent the high inclines. But it's interesting too, when you go along the railroad, you can see places where they made a cut. And you can see they just threw the stone to the side. And when it came to wetland, it didn't matter then. They could fill in a wetland. And then it would fill in a wetland. Like they did at Deering Pond with train sign. But normally when they would fill in, they would use sand because sand was self-compacting.
Yep.
So if you go along a lot of these railheads, you see it's a lot of sand. With sand, it's self-compacting. Then they would put the stone and the rails on top of that. Kind of
Yep. If you go over to, it's the edge of Alfred, that's what, 202, right? And just before you get to the lights and stuff at Alfred, on the right is Bennett Road. If you park there, yeah, we don't have those pictures in it. Show the one with Danny in it, the quarry. Walk up to where the railroad crossed, and then walk to your right towards Sanford. It's a really neat area. You'll see over on the left clear evidence of where they quarried, probably when they were building the railroad. And then you walk further, and there's a cut, like you were talking about. And there's also like stone holding up the embankment still in. I believe they called that Hell's Gate because they were about to start down to come into Sanford-Springvale. And some people don't know this, but the railroad did go into Sanford. It just nicked into it by Shaw's Ridge, and then all of a sudden it was Springvale. But anybody? Wait.
Just to add to that, the Eastern Sanford Railroad, as far as I know, operated until about 1961. And it was an artery for Nassau College, which had a huge international exchange population. So there was literally, our railroad was one of the last surviving interurban railroads prior to trolleys due to Nassau College and the population here.
Did not know that. Good one.
They went all the way to Lava Farms.
Yeah.
And then also just another way is the economy, the railroad, the nights, the winters, the blacksmith shops. The railroad injected a huge amount of labor and resources into our community that helped it thrive before, through, and after the wars.
Yeah. Very good. There's so many stories of like when they were building rail lines, like they bring in the Irish. Well, we all know what they like to drink. And picture, all of a sudden 500,000 Irishmen coming into town to help build this railroad. And they would make demands. No whiskey, no work, It's simple. Anybody? Yes, sir.
The reason the railroad came through Springvale is because Springvale was actually developed before Sanford. Point being, this was the town hall. So that's why it came through Springvale, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, and I meant to show you too. This, I found this shortly before I retired. Just this piece right here was sticking out of the ground. The rest was buried. I kept going by it on the train on the old WNP in Portland. One day I was like, I gotta go. This looks like a semaphore. So we ended up digging it out and bending it back as best we could. So these semaphores were one of the original types of signals where the arm would move as opposed to just the color light. So most of the time, vertical means clear, caution, horizontal's red, stop. So every depot would have a semaphore, which we call an order board, so that the operator could stop the train to hand them train orders, or if it was yellow, they had a little thing with a little fork on it, and they just hand it up to the train crew as they went by, stuff like that. Any other questions? Oh, one more.
Yeah, early on though, the telegraph was very important to the railroad.
Yeah. Yeah.
For moving trains.
Yeah, down at Sandown, telegraph was very important, because that's how they transmitted the train orders, and we still have the order bay where the operator was, and the Morse code and whatnot. So I hope it's still there. That's an inside joke.
Just one more thing that made me think about is standardized time zones and clocks and watches were a result of the railroads. And when the Transcontinental was going from one state to the other in different time zones, everybody was kind of still on local sundial and whatever into the late 1800s. And that's what caused a lot of collisions and conductors and traffic control for trains. So the standardized time zones that we have today were literally a result of the railroad. And the clock and watchmakers in New York and some of those places where they had railroad timepieces they made to avoid the crashes.
Yeah.
Because of the inconsistencies from here to the west.
Sometimes
That's an interesting piece of history.
yeah, it is. And sometimes the train when they're crossing the time zone, especially on daylight savings, they may have to sit in one place for an hour so that they're on time again. So I'm going to leave you with this. This happened with the train going from up there to Bangor, Maine, all the way to Chicago, and it was coming through Sanford-Springvale. About 3 o'clock in the morning, this fella's sound asleep in the upper berth, his sleeper. This little tapping sound comes from the lower berth. Sweet little voices, "Excuse me, sir, are you awake?" Says, "Well, I am now." She says, "It's awful cold down here. I was wondering if you could fetch me a blanket." He said, "I got a better idea. Why don't we pretend we're married?" She goes, "That sounds like a great idea." He said, "Good, go fetch your own blanket." Thanks for having me.
Like Jagger Mill, the old Jagger Mill Road.
when you saw that boxcar rolling by itself, that's called kicking a car, or the old ones would say shunting, but you would just use the gravity, take the air brakes off, and let the grade move the car along.
Where is this?
Some of them, I have no idea. I know
think
this.
that's Westbrook.
It's probably, this would be probably up toward Westbrook. There's some in Gorham. There's one coming up where they're crossing the Saco River.
Are those tracks still being used?
No, they're abandoned. The switch. That was probably the handbrake. Every engine has a handbrake. See how the handbrake, every car and engine has a handbrake. See the wheel thing up on the top? It's because way back when, the brakemen would run along the tops of the cars. It's a very dangerous job. And they have the handbrakes right there so they can help slow the train down and whatnot. That would be the Saco River. Yeah, I don't know if they were actually going that slow. It's just the way they, maybe toward the end they were. That looks like Buxton. This footage was just posted within about a year ago, and no one really has ever seen movies of the Sanford and Eastern. And there is a Facebook site, and this old timer Russ Monroe, he took these movies, and so we're all very appreciative that it became public.
Where is that station there?
That could be Waterboro. they start out here.
No, what I mean is, this is the southbound run, and it's just shot in sequence.
What I saw, when he was crossing the Saco River, looked to me like he was heading west, so toward here. So now they're back in Sanford-Springvale. That's a piece of work equipment. See the flat car, and then they got a little bit of a derrick thing there. So that's how they would transport rail brakes. Nothing worse when you're running the locomotive and they tell you, yeah, we're gonna have to hold you up, we got a broken rail. We'd always say good waiters make good tips.
Where was that?
Exactly where Deer Lumber is in town now, it's the same building. You actually look closely at the back of the store, there's actually one rail that's still in place.
I like hearing things like that. Guess where I'm going?
Well, we're close to it.
There's one more chapter to the story here, and that's the effort to return some of the history to the.
Hold it up closer to your mouth.
Oh, sorry about that. One more chapter, and that's the effort to return some of the history to the rail bed. Have people seen any of these along the roadside? People know what they are? What's that?
Mile markers?
Yes, mile markers. So on one side, there's either a P for Portland or W to Worcester, and the number would tell you how many miles to your destination. There used to be 6 of them through Springvale. And when the trains went out in 1961, this was sort of no man's land. The rail pit. No, people didn't think anybody owned it anymore, and these were great souvenirs. One of them was across the street from us for years and years and years on Howard Street, right behind here. Some of them have been moved and moved again, and I got really interested in finding out where all these were. I've been able to locate about 6 of them, and I was curious about could we get these back to the rail trail where they belong? And so I started knocking on people's doors and just asking them, and I was surprised to find out that at least 4 of these people had no idea what they even were. One person thought it might have been a hitching post, but they were just, had no idea. It was, several generations removed from their memory. So that's sort of the inception of this whole program, was maybe if we, develop some appreciation for what was here, the people who have them might be willing to say, yeah, they really do belong back where they could tell the story of the rail bed through Springvale. So, I don't know if it will work, but I'm hoping that just because the community now knows that there's an effort to bring them back, and that over time, maybe it won't happen overnight, but maybe over time, people will then, yeah, I'm willing to do that. Anyway, so it's still a work in progress, but it would be great to have them back on the rail trail. The rail trail now is in incredible shape. The Trails Committee has really improved it. It's really a gem for the city, and it would be really nice to be able to tell some of the history by bringing these back. Any other?
Just so you understand what a milepost is, it's one of the most important parts of railroading. Every mile is a milepost, and train orders are based on mileage. So you have to use a milepost or something like a station as a definition. So in other words, let's say I'm bringing a train up from Rochester and they're doing track work east of Sanford-Springvale. They don't want my train up there because they're all over the track. So they would give you such a train order that could say, do not pass milepost P41. Or you could work between milepost P36 and P38. That gives you exclusive occupancy. So train orders, or mileposts are very important with train orders. And I can tell you firsthand knowledge that at night, or especially fogginess, mileposts are an engineer's best friend, so you really know where you are.
What would you have to do though if you had to stop? Did you have to sit there and wait till the work got done on the track?
What's that?
If you had to stop between certain mile posts, you have to just sit there and wait till the work was done?
Yep. Good waiters make good tips.
The original, when we first built railroads, and they only had a single track, and they were trying to run trains in both directions, the original way to keep the track safe is that between two stations, whichever locomotive got to the midpoint first, the other one was forced to stop and back up back to the station. That was the original primitive traffic controls. They developed, improved over time, but that was the original way they ensured safety.
So there was no basically a time frame as to from point A to point B. It was all kind of guesswork.
I've set places 6, 8, 10 hours, or we'd go 20 miles and stop for something, and we could work up to 12 hours, and then about 10 hours into it, they gave up on us, called a taxi and got us out of there.
Oh, one last thing I learned about the railroad through Springvale. We think of the rail bed as a pretty flat terrain, if there's really no grade to it. But if you're tugging hundreds of tons of cargo, any little grade is like huge. And it turns out when they were in Springvale, the locomotives had to take on helper engines to get up the hill to Deering Pond, which we don't think of as a hill at all. Same thing up to Shaw's Ridge. They had to go uphill to Shaw's Ridge. They had to take on a helper engine. Anyway.
Lee, you got one more picture.
Oh. Yeah. That's just the map of where the mileposts are, starting up in Shaw's Ridge and all the way back down through Lebanon. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming.
One more question.
Oh, one more?
You were showing in the movie, trains going into the building. I believe that building is right here in Springvale today, where the Deering Lumber building is.
Yeah, he was just saying that, he said that.
I worked for Deering Lumber, and I can show you the doors that are still there in the back of the building. And when I started work there in the 70s, the tracks came into the building, and it is now, they've remodeled a couple times since then, and you can't see that. But the doors are still part of the building, and unless they vinyl sided it this last month or so, those doors are still exist.
So he says, how long ago did you see that? He said he was in there and you could still see one rail still left at the far end of the building.
Yep, where the doors were.
I will set up a time and date when I come down here and you guys can give me a tour. But just reminds me, quick story, I was in Bradford, New Hampshire, and we were tracing the old Claremont and Concord Railroad, and we saw this building, and we're like, wow. And there's a milepost right behind it, so I'm like, oh, they had to switch this place out. So I went in it, and it's like a farm store kind of place, and I got talking to the lady about, you know, what was this when the railroad was here, and she goes, you gotta talk to that fellow over there. So I started talking to him, and he goes, come with me. So walk in there, and then he takes me in the back where the lumber is and the really high ceilings. He goes, look up. He goes, see all that black up there? They used to park the steam engine in here. That's all from the cinders. So, like I say, you never know what you're going to find. I found a 1889, I think it was, big Moxie bottle. Somebody was wearing a Moxie shirt. You got Moxie, don't you? But, yeah, so anyway, there's a lot of relics around. You could be driving around and all of a sudden you see a funny looking garage and it could be the old section house where the maintenance of way people worked. You know, things do get moved.
Just one quick story. 25, 30 years ago, we used to live in Massachusetts. And the Celtics were playing. Okay? It was a night game. And so 2 or 3 of us got tickets to take the train into Boston. And it was a nice night. They were playing a good team. So we're sitting in the car, in the railroad tracks there, and, you know, we're going into Boston, then all of a sudden, boom, 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 and we're bumping like this. What the heck is this? So the employees come into the cabins into the cars, don't move, everybody sit in your seats. And we're saying, look, the Celtics are gonna start playing, we gotta get into Boston here, come on. And they're saying, well, we'll send a bus out to pick you up. So the time's going and going, we're all getting, you know, several of them guys were going to see the game. So come to find out, the wheels somehow came off of the tracks and it slid like an inch or 2 or 3, and it was bouncing on the 8x10 in the thing. And so they came in, they were good. They came in, they told us not to move. Is anybody hurt? Blah, blah, blah. They came in with lights and they had people getting us out of the cars, going into the bus. Fortunately, they called the bus so we weren't too late to go see the game. But that was an experience.
Yeah. On the railroad, when something like that happens, it's called, you're on the ground. Simple. Well, we're on the ground at milepost P44, you know, whatever. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you, and it's not germane to this, but what he said, when they did the big dig, I was told one of the salient reasons they did that was to connect Boston, North Station and South Station, which originally, the original cost of the big dig was $1.5 billion. It came out to be $15 billion, and they never did. Is that a true story?
I had heard they were going to put the rail connection in, but
They never did.
just never came to fruition. No. No. We're on the ground.
Don't move.
Yep. If you ever want to. If you ever want me to do a talk that's more general and tell some of my stories and whatnot, I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well done. Just 2 quick announcements. We do have some light refreshments in the library here. And if you are feeling generous, and we hope you are, please make a small donation in our Burnham and Morrill bean pot. Thank you all for coming.